The space between universes had no name in any language spoken by mortals. Scientists called it the bleed. Mystics whispered of it as the void between worlds. In truth, it simply existed as a membrane, separating infinite realities, each one bleeding into the next, through cracks too small for anything substantial to pass through. Until tonight, in the deepest chamber of his infernal throne room, Trigon the Terrible gazed into a scrying pool that showed him fragments of dimensions beyond his reach. The demon lord's 4 eyes burned with crimson hunger as he watched streamers of golden energy pulse through the bleed like veins of liquid fire. Argent energy. He had heard whispers of it from wayward demons who had glimpsed other hells, other dimensions where this power source fueled entire civilizations. Magnificent! Trigon rumbled his voice, causing the stones beneath him to crack. Power without limit. Power without soul. Power that answers to no god. His daughter Raven would have warned him. His priests would have counseled patience. But Trigon had banished them all from his presence for this ritual. He required no counsel. He was conquest incarnate, the devourer of galaxies, the flame that consumed 1,000 worlds. What was one more source of power to claim? The demon lord raised his massive hands, and reality itself began to warp around him. Symbols older than human language burned in the air, each one a hook cast into the space between dimensions. He could feel it now, that river of golden fury flowing through the cosmic membrane. All he needed was to puncture the barrier, to create a conduit large enough to channel that power into his own hell dimension. The first ritual circle ignited with black flame. The second followed. By the 7th, the very fabric of his throne room had begun to tear. "Come to me," Trigon commanded, his voice resonating across dimensional boundaries. "Come and make me eternal." The bleed screamed. It was not a sound any ear could hear, but every mystic on Earth Zero felt it in their bones. In Gotham, John Constantine dropped his cigarette and cursed with genuine fear. In the Oblivion Bar, phantom patrons vanished like smoke. In the Rock of Eternity, the wizard Shazam gripped his staff with white knuckles as the ancient stones trembled. Something was wrong. Something was catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. In the space between spaces, 2 hells touched for the first time in eternity. Trigon's domain, built from the conquered remains of thousands of destroyed civilizations, pressed against something far older. The hell of another universe, a dimension of endless torment, built not from conquest, but from industrial cruelty, from the systematic harvesting of suffering itself. Where Trigon's hell was chaos and flame, this other place was order and machinery. Where his demons were wild and varied, theirs were manufactured and uniform. And in the deepest pit of that mechanized nightmare, something had been sleeping. The golden energy Trigon sought to steal was not power lying dormant. It was the lifeblood of that other hell, the fuel that had sustained its endless war machine. Every drop he siphoned was a thread connecting his dimension to theirs, and with each passing second, the breach grew wider. Trigon laughed as the power flooded into him. He could feel his form expanding, his strength multiplying beyond even his vast reserves. This was godhood. This was supremacy absolute. He did not notice when the laughter stopped echoing back. Deep in that other hell, in a sarcophagus sealed by powers that predated human civilization, something stirred. The argent energy being drained away was not merely fuel. It was a leash, a chain. The only thing that had kept the sleeper contained after all other bonds had failed. The tomb shook once, twice. On the 3rd tremor stone that had remained sealed for eons, simply exploded outward. What emerged could barely be called a man. Clad in armor green as oxidized bronze and gray as tombstone, standing just over 6 feet tall, he should have been insignificant compared to the titans and god kings of the DC universe. But something about him, made reality itself take notice. Every demon in both hells suddenly fell silent. Every infernal forge, every torture chamber, every screaming pit went quiet, as though the concept of sound had been revoked. The Doomslayer had awakened. He did not speak. He did not need to. His helmet, an angular construction of ancient metal and modern fury, turned slowly, as if scanning his surroundings. Then his gaze fixed on a single direction. The direction where his energy was being stolen. The direction where someone had made the mistake of drawing his attention. The Slayer began to walk. Each footfall cracked the stone beneath him. Demons scrambled away from his path, their instincts screaming warnings that their minds could not comprehend. This was not a warrior. This was not a hunter. This was a natural law given form, an equation that always resolved to the same answer. Demon plus Doomslayer equals 0. The breach between hells was still small, barely the width of a doorway. The Slayer did not slow. He simply stepped through. Trigon felt the intrusion a heartbeat before it happened. Something was crossing from that other hell into his domain. Something that moved through the dimensional barrier as though it were merely a suggestion rather than a law of physics. The Demon Lord's 4 eyes widened, and for the first time in millennia, Trigon the Terrible felt something he had almost forgotten. Doubt. "What are you?" he whispered into the void. The void did not answer. But something in it began loading a shotgun. In the halls of the Justice League Watchtower, alarms suddenly blazed to life. Batman's hand moved to his comm unit as screens lit up with mystical energy readings that made no sense. Superman's enhanced hearing caught something that made him turn toward the void of space, his expression troubled. Wonder Woman drew her sword without conscious thought, her warrior instinct screaming that something ancient and terrible had just entered their world. On Earth, below every demon-touched artifact, every cursed relic, every gateway to the infernal, suddenly went dark. It was as though hell itself had drawn a breath. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, a war older than human civilization had just found a new battlefield. The Doomslayer had come to Earth Zero, and he had come for blood. The lowest circles of hell had always been a place of calculated suffering. Neron designed his torments with artistic precision. Belial crafted punishments that lasted centuries. Even the mindless beasts that prowled the burning wastelands operated within a cosmic framework of damnation and judgment. That framework shattered the moment the Slayer entered their realm. The first demon to encounter him was a pit lord, a creature 15 feet tall with muscles like braided steel cables and horns that could gore a tank. It had lorded over its domain for 3,000 years, feeding on the despair of condemned souls. When the armored figure appeared at the edge of its territory, the pit lord charged with a roar that had broken the minds of lesser beings. The Slayer caught the demon's charge with one hand. For a heartbeat, the pit lord struggled confusion, replacing its rage. No mortal should possess such strength. No angel had ever gripped it with such casual dominance. The armored hand tightened, and the demon's wrist shattered like dry kindling. Before it could scream, a fist drove through its chest cavity and emerged from its back holding something that pulsed with sickly light. The pit lord's essence. Its soul. The very thing that would have allowed it to reform and resurrect after any conventional death. The Slayer crushed it in his palm. The demon's body collapsed into ash, and something unprecedented happened. The soul did not return to hell's regeneration cycle. It did not drift back to the infernal forges for reconstitution. It simply ceased to be erased from existence so completely that hell itself seemed to flinch. The Slayer did not pause to observe his work. He was already moving toward the next concentration of demonic presence, his gait steady and mechanical. Behind him, the very ground where the pit lord had fallen began to crack, as though the realm itself was rejecting what it had witnessed. Word spread through the infernal hierarchy with the speed of wildfire. Something was in hell, something that killed permanently, something that moved through their domain like a natural disaster given purpose and direction. In the halls of Screaming Stone, Neron convened an emergency gathering of Hell's nobility. Demon lords and ladies materialized from across the realm, their forms ranging from beautiful to grotesque, but all sharing the same barely concealed unease. "Explain this to me slowly," Neron commanded, his cultured voice tight with controlled fury. "You're telling me that a single entity has crossed from another dimension and is currently murdering its way through our lower circles?" A lesser demon, barely coherent with fear, prostrated itself before the gathering. "My lord, it's not murder. Murder implies struggle. This is extermination. The bone renders through 100 warriors at it. They lasted 37 seconds. The flesh weavers tried to corrupt its mind. It didn't even slow down, and the souls it destroys don't come back." "Impossible," one of the demon ladies hissed. "Nothing can permanently erase an infernal essence. That violates the fundamental laws of this realm." "Then perhaps," a new voice interrupted, cold and ancient, "we should consider that this thing does not acknowledge our laws." Blaze materialized from shadow, his expression grim. The demon had walked 1,000 battlefields, had witnessed the fall of civilizations and the birth of nightmares. Nothing in his endless existence had prepared him for what he had just observed. "I watched it kill a torment titan." Blaze continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "A creature that survived the war in heaven. The thing didn't use magic, didn't invoke any dark pacts or forbidden rituals. It simply tore the titan apart with its bare hands and moved on. And as it walked away, I felt something I haven't experienced in 5,000 years. "What?" Neron demanded. Prey instinct. The chamber fell silent. Demons did not experience fear the way mortals did. They were fear's architects, its craftsmen. But what Blaze described touched something more primal than mere terror. "Where is it now?" one of the nobles asked. As if in answer, the entire chamber shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. In the distance, something that might have been screaming cut off with abrupt finality. "It's heading toward us," Blaze said flatly. "It's not wandering. It's not exploring. It's moving with purpose, like it's following a scent. And it's getting closer with every passing moment." Neron's jaw tightened. "Then we stop it here. Gather every warrior in the mid-circles. Deploy the Hellhounds. Activate the Obsidian Legion. If this creature wants to challenge Hell's authority, we'll remind it that this is our domain." The demon lords dispersed to marshal their forces, but Blaze remained behind, staring at the door the Slayer would eventually reach. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly to the empty room. "You can't fight a force of nature with an army." On Earth Zero, the mystical community scrambled to understand what was happening. In the House of Mystery, John Constantine chain-smoked while poring over texts that should have remained buried. Zatanna materialized beside him, her stage costume replaced with practical combat gear. "Tell me you figured this out," she said without preamble. Constantine didn't look up from the grimoire. "You know that feeling when you're in a building and you hear the fire alarm, but you also hear the building start to groan? That moment when you realize the alarm isn't the problem? The problem is the building's about to collapse. John, I need you to focus." "I am focused, love. I'm focused on the fact that every divination spell I've cast in the last hour points to the same conclusion. Hell is dying. Not metaphorically, actually dying. Something's in there killing it, and it's not stopping." Zatanna's face paled. "That's not possible. Hell is eternal. It's a fundamental constant of the universe." "Yeah, well, someone forgot to tell whatever's down there. Every demon-touched artifact I've got has gone cold. My usual contacts in the infernal realms aren't answering. And the temperature in London just dropped 5 degrees for no bloody reason." Constantine finally looked up and his expression was haunted. Whatever's happening down there, it's going to have consequences up here. Big ones. In the Tower of Fate, Dr. Fate stood motionless before the orb of Nabu, his golden helmet reflecting the swirling visions within. Kent Nelson's voice echoed from behind the mask, strained with effort. Nabu, I can't see it clearly. Every time I try to focus on this entity, the vision fragments. The ancient lord's voice resonated through the helm. That is because it exists outside the normal causal framework. It is an anomaly, Kent. A being that should not be existing in a place it was never meant to reach. The cosmic order cannot properly categorize it, and so it appears to us as a blind spot in fate itself. Can we stop it? There was a long pause before Nabu answered. I do not know if we should. Back in Hell, the Slayer reached the first major defensive line. The Obsidian Legion stood in perfect formation. 5,000 demon warriors encased in armor, forged from crystallized suffering. Their commander, a veteran of the war in heaven, raised his blade and roared the charge. The Slayer loaded his shotgun. What followed was not a battle. Battles implied some degree of uncertainty, some possibility of defeat. This was a culling. The Slayer moved through the Legion like a scythe through wheat, and with each demon that fell, something changed. Their bodies didn't just die, they corrupted, twisted, began to resemble the manufactured horrors of that other hell from which the Slayer had emerged. Muscles bulged grotesquely, skin charred and cracked. Eyes glowed with the sickly gold of argent contamination. The demons of DC's hell were being infected by their own deaths, transformed into grotesque parodies as the Slayer's presence bled into the realm itself. By the time the last warrior fell, the battlefield looked like an abattoir designed by a mad engineer. The Slayer stood among the carnage, utterly silent, utterly still. Then he turned toward the upper circles, toward where the strongest concentrations of demonic power resided. Toward Trigon's throne. In the House of Secrets, Phantom Stranger appeared beside Constantine and Zatanna, his expression unreadable behind his eternal calm. "How bet?" Constantine asked. Trigon made contact with a hell from another universe. He sought to steal its power source. Instead, he imported its apex predator. The stranger's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. In approximately 4 hours, that predator will reach Trigon's throne room. What happens then will determine whether Hell survives the night. And if Hell doesn't survive, Phantom Stranger turned to leave his form already fading into shadow. Then we discover what happens to a universe when damnation itself ceases to exist. The Slayer continued his ascent through Hell's hierarchy, leaving only silence and ash in his wake. The throne of Trigon sat at the apex of Hell's hierarchy, a cathedral of bone and obsidian that stretched toward a sky perpetually choked with ash and crimson lightning. For eons, the demon lord had ruled from this seat, his mere presence enough to keep the infernal legions in line. He had conquered galaxies. He had devoured civilizations. He had broken heroes and corrupted saints. Now, for the first time since his ascension, Trigon paced. "My lord," one of his remaining priests ventured its voice trembling. "Perhaps we should consider relocating to..." The priest exploded into component atoms before finishing the sentence. Trigon's hand still crackled with residual energy as he turned his 4 eyes toward the throne room's massive doors. "I will not flee from an intruder in my own domain," the demon lord growled. "I am Trigon the Conqueror. I am the flame that consumed Azarath. I have walked between dimensions for millennia, and no creature has ever forced me to retreat." But even as he spoke, he could feel the deaths rippling through his realm. Each one was a pinprick of absence, a small void where a demon's essence should have been cycling through resurrection. The upper circles had fallen silent. His generals, creatures that had served him for thousands of years, had simply ceased to exist. And still the intruder climbed toward him. Trigon expanded his consciousness, reaching out to observe this creature that dared challenge his supremacy. What he found made even his ancient mind recoil. The being ascending through his hell was not powered by magic or dark pacts. It was not a god or an angel. It was something that existed in defiance of cosmic law itself, a walking contradiction that refused to acknowledge the fundamental rules of reality. "What are you?" Trigon whispered, his voice echoing through the empty throne room. The massive doors, each one carved from the petrified remains of a destroyed world, suddenly buckled inward. Once, twice. On the third impact, they exploded off their hinges, tons of enchanted material flying across the chamber like scattered paper. The Doomslayer walked through the smoking aperture. He was shorter than Trigon had expected. Barely over 6 feet, dwarfed by the 60-foot ceiling and the Demon Lord's own towering form. The armor he wore should have been ceremonial decorative, something from a primitive era long past. But as Trigon focused his perception on it, he realized the suit was still operational, still functioning with a technology that made his own conquered sciences look like children's toys. The helmet turned, and though Trigon could not see the eyes behind that visor, he felt their weight settle on him with the force of a collapsing star. "So," Trigon said, forcing his voice to remain steady, "you are the creature that has been murdering its way through my realm. I should thank you for removing the weak from my hierarchy." They were becoming complacent. The Slayer said nothing. He simply began walking forward, his pace measured and unhurried. Trigon's 4 eyes blazed with genuine anger now. "You dare approach me without reverence, without fear. I am eternal. I am conquest incarnate." Still the Slayer walked. Each footfall cracked the obsidian floor, and with each step, Trigon felt something he had not experienced in living memory begin to coil in his chest. Uncertainty. "Kneel," Trigon commanded, his voice reverberating with the full weight of his cosmic authority. The word carried power that could shatter dimensions, force that could bend reality itself to his will. The Slayer loaded a shell into his shotgun. Trigon's restraint shattered. He raised both hands and unleashed a torrent of infernal energy that had reduced planets to cosmic dust. The blast struck the Slayer dead center, a column of annihilation that would have erased lesser gods from existence. When the light faded, the Slayer stood exactly where he had been, smoke rising from his armor. A few scorch marks marred the plating. Nothing else. "Impossible," Trigon breathed. The Slayer raised his weapon and fired. The explosion caught Trigon in his lower right shoulder, tearing through demonic flesh that had weathered supernovas. The Demon Lord roared more from shock than pain and retaliated with a barrage of energy projectiles that could have leveled a small country. What followed was not a battle between equals. It was an execution in slow motion. Trigon threw everything he had at the advancing figure. He summoned walls of flame that burned at temperatures exceeding the core of stars. He opened rifts to other dimensions, attempting to banish the Slayer into the spaces between realities. He called upon the collected souls of 1,000,000 conquered worlds, manifesting them as a spectral army that rushed the armored warrior in a tide of screaming anguish. The Slayer walked through it all. The flames parted around him. The dimensional rifts collapsed the moment he approached them. The spectral army disintegrated like morning fog, each soul released from bondage the instant it touched his presence. And with each failed attack, with each defense that crumbled, the Slayer closed the distance. "Stop!" Trigon commanded, and for the first time his voice carried desperation. "I can give you power dominion over realities. I can make you a lord of." The Slayer's hand shot out and seized Trigon by his lower jaw, cutting off the words. The Demon Lord, who stood 3 times the height of his attacker, found himself held in place by a grip that felt like a planet's gravitational well. Trigon's 4 eyes widened. In all his eons of existence, across all the worlds he had conquered and the dimensions he had ravaged, no one had ever simply grabbed him. The casual nature of the act was somehow more terrifying than any weapon. The Slayer's free hand moved to his belt and drew a weapon that seemed to pulse with red light. A blade of some kind, but unlike any sword Trigon had seen. It hummed with an energy that made the demon's essence recoil in instinctive horror. The crucible. Wait, Trigon managed to gasp. You don't understand. I am fundamental to this reality. I am woven into the cosmic framework. If you destroy me, you'll destabilize the entire metaphysical balance of... The blade punched through his chest. Trigon screamed a sound that shattered windows in Gotham and made every magic user on Earth Zero collapse in agony. But it was not the physical pain that drove the scream. It was the sensation of his very essence being unmade, not destroyed, but erased, written out of existence at the most fundamental level. The Slayer twisted the blade. Trigon's form began to disintegrate, not into ash or energy, but into nothing. His four eyes dimmed one by one as the crucible's energy spread through his metaphysical structure, severing every connection, every thread of power that had kept him anchored to reality. He tried to separate his consciousness, to flee into one of his backup vessels, or hidden phylacteries. The blade followed him into every refuge, burning through each attempted escape with methodical inevitability. Please, Trigon whispered, his voice now barely audible. I am necessary. The balance requires... The Slayer pulled this blade free and drove it through the demon's skull. Trigon, the terrible conqueror of galaxies, devourer of civilizations, the flame that had burned across 1,000 realities, ceased to exist. The throne room fell silent. Then hell itself began to scream. The death of a demon lord was traumatic to the infernal realm. The permanent erasure of one was catastrophic. Cracks spiderwebbed across every surface. The rivers of magma that had flowed for eternity began to cool and solidify. The sky, always choked with ash and lightning, suddenly cleared to reveal something that had never been visible before: absolute emptiness. The void that had always existed beyond hell's constructed reality became visible, and demons across every circle looked up in horror at the nothingness that waited for them. On Earth, the consequences manifested immediately. In Titan's tower, Raven's eyes snapped open. She tried to scream but found she had no voice. Her connection to her father, the link that had defined her existence since birth, was simply gone. Not severed, not blocked. Absent as though it had never existed. She collapsed, her powers flickering and dying like candles in a hurricane. In the Justice League, Dark Headquarters, every demon-touched artifact simultaneously shattered. Containment circles failed. Binding spells unraveled. John Constantine grabbed his chest as though he'd been shot, feeling every pact and contract he'd ever made, with infernal entities suddenly null and void. Bloody hell, he gasped. He's dead. Trigon is actually dead. Zatanna caught him as he swayed. Who killed him? Constantine's laugh was edged with hysteria. I don't know, love. But whatever it is, it just did what the entire Justice League couldn't manage. It permanently killed a demon lord. In the Watchtower, Batman's screens lit up with alerts from every mystical monitoring station on the planet. Superman appeared beside him, his expression troubled. Bruce, our magic-based sensors just went haywire. What's happening? Batman's jaw tightened as he processed the incoming data. Hell's metaphysical signature is collapsing. Demonic activity worldwide has dropped to zero. And something is still active in the dimensional space where Hell used to be. Could this be Darkseid? No. Batman's tone carried absolute certainty. Darkseid conquers. This is something else. This is extermination. Wonder Woman joined them, her hand on her sword. I sense something ancient. Something that exists outside the normal order of things. It's like standing before the concept of vengeance given physical form. In the ruins of Trigon's throne room, the Slayer stood motionless among the settling dust. Around him, Hell continued its death spiral. Demons fled in every direction, seeking escape routes that no longer existed. The realm's fundamental structure was failing, collapsing inward like a star at the end of its life. The Slayer's helmet turned slowly, scanning the dying dimension. His sensors picked up residual argent energy signatures, traces of the power that Trigon had stolen. The traces led in one direction, toward the breach between dimensions, toward the point where this hell connected to another reality. There would be more demons there. There always were. The Slayer began walking again, his pace unchanged, his purpose absolute. Behind him, the throne of Trigon crumbled into dust, and with it the first pillar of Hell's cosmic authority fell into permanent darkness. The war had only just begun. Darkseid stood in the observation chamber of his fortress, gazing into the cosmic void through a viewport that spanned half a mile. His stone-gray features remained impassive as his sensors registered the collapse of Hell's dimensional signature. Around him, the technology of Apocalypse hummed with power that had subjugated thousands of worlds. Yet even these instruments struggled to classify what they were detecting. "Report!" he commanded, his voice rumbling like continental plates grinding together. Desaad materialized from the shadows, his twisted form genuflecting before his master. "My lord, the dimensional anomaly has intensified. The hell dimension of Earth Zaarshus has ceased to exist. In its place, we detect a null space and a single energy signature. A single signature destroyed an entire infernal realm." Darkseid's tone carried neither disbelief nor fear, only cold calculation. "Show me." The viewport shifted reality, bending to display the remnants of what had been Trigon's domain. Where a sprawling dimension of torment had existed, now there was only void, punctuated by floating debris. And in the center of that void, a solitary figure stood on a fragment of broken stone. Darkseid leaned forward, his eyes beginning to glow with red light. "Enhance." The image magnified, revealing the armored warrior in perfect detail. Darkseid's vast intellect, which had cataloged every significant power in the multiverse, found no match in his records. The armor was primitive, yet functional. The figure's stature was unremarkable. Yet the readings his instruments provided made no sense. The entity registered as mortal, yet possessed no biological signs of life. It carried weapons that appeared crude, yet emitted energy signatures beyond even new god technology. "It is an anomaly," Darkseid concluded, "an anti-divine force, something that exists in opposition to the natural order." His eyes blazed brighter. "And it will serve Apocalypse." Desaad's grin was predatory. "Shall I prepare the indoctrination chambers, my lord?" "No. Bring it here intact. I wish to study this creature before I break it to my will. Deploy a parademon battalion and have Steppenwolf lead the retrieval." "As you command, my lord." The boom tube opened with a thunderous crack. A tunnel of energy punching through dimensional barriers to connect Apocalypse with the void where Hell had been. The Slayer's helmet turned toward the portal sensors, analyzing the new threat with mechanical precision. They came through in waves. Parademons, the shock troops of Apocalypse, shrieking and howling as they poured from the breach. Each one was a twisted fusion of different species rebuilt and reprogrammed to serve the will of Darkseid. They had conquered civilizations. They had broken the will of Green Lanterns. They feared nothing. The Slayer recognized them instantly as demons in everything but name. His response was automatic. The first wave died before they understood what was happening. The Slayer's shotgun spoke with mechanical efficiency, each blast removing a parademon from existence. His movements were economical, precise, wasting no motion as he tore through their ranks. When the shotgun needed reloading, he transitioned seamlessly to the plasma rifle, the weapon's azure bolts punching through armor that could withstand tank shells. 50 parademons became 40. 40 became 20. 20 became scattered remains, floating in the void. Through the boom tube, Steppenwolf observed the slaughter with growing rage. The general of Apocalypse had led armies for millennia. He had fought the old gods themselves and survived. The sight of his warriors being systematically butchered by a single opponent ignited something primal in his warrior's heart. "For Darkseid!" he roared, charging through the portal with his electro-axe raised high. The Slayer dropped his empty rifle and caught the descending axe with one hand. Steppenwolf's confidence evaporated. The impact should have driven his enemy into the ground, should have split armor and shattered bone. Instead, his weapon stopped as though it had struck an immovable object. The general threw his full strength behind the axe muscles, enhanced by new god physiology, straining with effort that could have crushed mountains. The Slayer's grip did not waver. "You! What manner of—" Steppenwolf managed before the Slayer's free hand shot forward and seized him by the throat. The General of Apocalypse, who had fought Superman to a standstill, found himself lifted off his feet like a misbehaving child. He clawed at the armored hand, his electro-axe sparking uselessly as he tried to break free. The Slayer's visor stared at him with mechanical indifference, and Steppenwolf realized with dawning horror that he was not facing a warrior. He was facing an execution machine. The Slayer twisted, and Steppenwolf's neck snapped with a sound like breaking timber. The body went limp, and the Slayer discarded it into the void without ceremony. The electro-axe followed moments later, spinning away into the darkness. On Apocalypse, Desaad's instruments registered Steppenwolf's death and immediately sounded alarms. "My lord, the general has fallen. The entity's power level is far beyond our initial estimates." Darkseid's expression did not change. "Increase deployment. Send the Assault Elite and activate the Omega Protocol. I will claim this prize myself if necessary." The boom tube expanded and 100 more warriors poured through. These were not mindless parademons, but trained soldiers, veterans of the Conquest Wars. They moved with tactical precision, establishing overlapping fields of fire and coordinated attack patterns that had defeated entire Justice League rosters. The Slayer walked into their formation and began the systematic process of killing them all. Plasma bolts bounced off his armor. Energy weapons that could melt through starship hulls left scorch marks that faded within seconds. One soldier managed to land a blow with a shock maul that would have stunned Wonder Woman. The Slayer caught the weapon mid-swing, tore it from the soldier's hands, and used it to cave in its owner's skull before moving to the next target. Within minutes, the assault force was decimated. Within 10, they were extinct. Desaad watched the readings with growing unease. "My lord, perhaps we should reconsider this approach. The entity appears to be adapting to our tactics." "Silence!" Darkseid rose from his throne, his presence seeming to expand to fill the chamber. "You fail to understand what we are witnessing, Desaad. This is not a warrior or a weapon. This is a universal constant, a law of physics given form. And like all laws, it can be harnessed by those with sufficient will." The Lord of Apocalypse stepped toward his personal boom tube. "Prepare my avatar. I will confront this anomaly directly." "My lord, that seems unwise. We know nothing of its true capabilities." Darkseid's eyes blazed with Omega energy. "Then I shall educate myself." The avatar that emerged onto the battlefield was a manifestation of Darkseid's power, a form that operated within physical reality, while his true self remained safely removed from direct harm. It stood 12 feet tall, radiating power that warped the space around it. Lesser beings crumbled to ash in its mere presence. Gods had trembled before it. The Slayer looked up at the avatar and saw only another demon. "I am Darkseid." The avatar announced, its voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Lord of Apocalypse, master of the anti-life equation. You will kneel anomaly, you will serve, or you will be broken and remade as I see fit." The Slayer's response was to raise his fist. What followed was violence on a scale that registered on seismic sensors across multiple dimensions. The avatar struck with planet-cracking force. The Slayer met each blow with equal intensity. Stone shattered. Reality buckled. The void itself seemed to recoil from the ferocity of their exchange. Darkseid's avatar unleashed the Omega Beam's twin lances of energy that could track targets across space and time, that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level. The beams curved through the void, pursuing the Slayer with unerring accuracy. The Slayer dodged the first volley, his movement somehow anticipating the beam's trajectory. When the second volley came, he didn't bother evading. The beams struck his chest plate dead center, and for a moment, the Omega energy tried to unmake him at the atomic level. Then, the energy simply stopped working. On Apocalypse, in the true throne room, Darkseid felt his connection to the Avatar flicker. The entity was resisting the Omega effect not through power or divine protection, but through simple refusal. It existed outside the causal framework that allowed the Omega beams to function. It was in the most literal sense an impossibility. "Fascinating," Darkseid murmured. In the void, the Slayer closed the distance, while the Avatar was still processing the failure of its primary weapon. His fist drove into the Avatar's midsection with force that created a shockwave visible from orbit. Cracks appeared in the construct's stone-like skin. The Slayer struck again, and again. Each blow precise targeted meant to destroy, rather than merely damage. The Avatar staggered its connection to Darkseid's true form, destabilizing. It tried to reform to repair the damage, but the Slayer's assault was relentless. Every blow disrupted the energy matrix that held the Avatar together. Within moments, the carefully constructed vessel was falling apart. "Impossible," Darkseid growled, watching through his Avatar's failing sensors. "No mortal force can overwhelm a construct of pure." The Slayer ripped the Avatar's head from its shoulders. The construct exploded into fragments of burning stone and dissipating energy. The boom tube collapsed, severed from its power source. And in the throne room of Apocalypse, Darkseid actually took a step backward. His Avatar had not been defeated. It had been obliterated so completely that the feedback nearly destabilized his connection to physical reality itself. For the first time in eons, the Lord of Apocalypse felt something approaching caution. "Desaad," he said quietly. "Seal all boom tubes to that sector. Quarantine protocols. Nothing enters or leaves until I determine how to contain this threat." "My lord, what is it?" Darkseid stared at the empty space where his Avatar had been destroyed, his expression unreadable. "I do not know. But it exists beyond the anti-life equation. Beyond the source, it is something that should not be operating according to rules I do not comprehend." His hands clenched into fists. "And I have made the grave error of drawing its attention to Apocalypse." In the void, the Slayer stood among the debris of his enemies. His sensors detected residual energy from the portal technology, traced it back to its source. A planet. A world filled with demons wearing different faces. The Slayer's armor systems activated, analyzing the dimensional breach, calculating vectors and trajectories. The boom tube technology had left a trail, a path he could follow. He began moving toward Apocalypse, toward the next concentration of demons that needed to be eliminated. Behind him, the last fragments of hell finally collapsed into absolute nothingness, and the death of an entire dimension echoed across the cosmic firmament like a funeral bell. The war machine had found its next battlefield. The boom tube that opened above Metropolis was not the controlled portal of new god technology. It was a wound in reality torn open through sheer force by something that refused to acknowledge the laws governing dimensional travel. The sky split with a sound like tearing metal, and through the breach stepped the Slayer, his armor still smoking from the battle with Apocalypse. He fell 3,000 feet and landed in the middle of Robinson Park with an impact that cracked the pavement in a 30-foot radius. Car alarms shrieked, windows shattered for blocks around, and then silence. The Slayer stood, his sensors scanning the surrounding cityscape. Millions of life signs registered, none of them demonic. He began walking each step, carrying him toward the faint traces of infernal energy his systems could still detect, scattered across the planet. The Justice League arrived within minutes. Superman descended first, his cape billowing in the wind as he landed 50 feet from the armored figure. Behind him, Wonder Woman touched down with her hand on her sword hilt. Batman materialized from the shadows, his detective's mind already analyzing the crater, the armor, the weapons. Flash vibrated into existence. Green Lantern constructed a barrier, and Cyborg's systems immediately began trying to identify the intruder. Unknown entity. Superman called out, his voice carrying the practiced authority of Earth's greatest hero. You've crossed into our world without authorization. We need you to stand down and explain your presence here. The Slayer's helmet turned towards Superman. For a moment, the two simply observed each other. Then the Slayer resumed walking, moving directly toward the Man of Steel, as though he were merely another obstacle to navigate around. I'm going to need you to stop, Superman said, stepping into the Slayer's path. The Slayer reached out with one hand and pushed Superman aside. It was not an attack, not a strike or a blow, simply a push, the kind one might use to move a piece of furniture. But the casual nature of the gesture made it more disturbing than any violent assault. Superman, who had held back moons and redirected asteroids, found himself displaced as effortlessly as a cardboard cutout. Wonder Woman's sword came free of its scabbard. That was unwise, warrior. Explain yourself or we will assume hostile intent. The Slayer ignored her, his focus locked on something only his sensors could detect. 3 blocks south, a gathering of cultists attempting to open a minor gateway. Blood Church remnant survivors of Trigon's fall trying desperately to reconnect with their vanished patron. He's not responding to communication. Cyborg reported his scanners struggling to penetrate the Slayer's armor. I can't get a read on his tech. It's like trying to analyze a black hole. Everything just gets absorbed. Batman stepped forward, his cape settling around him. He pushed past Superman without hesitation. Either he doesn't understand the threat we represent, or he doesn't care. Both possibilities are concerning. I sense no malice from him, Wonder Woman said slowly, her divine senses attuned to the intruder's presence. But neither do I sense mercy or compassion. He is purpose incarnate, a warrior so focused on his mission that all else simply ceases to exist in his perception. The Slayer continued walking. The League moved with him, maintaining distance, but ready to intervene. They passed civilians who scrambled out of the way, phones raised to record the bizarre procession. The armored figure paid them no attention whatsoever. His focus remained absolute. We need to make a decision, Flash said, vibrating with nervous energy. He's heading deeper into the city. If he's dangerous, we already know we can't stop him easily, Batman interrupted. He dismissed Superman like an annoyance. That level of strength suggests he could tear through most of our roster if provoked. Then what do we do? Green Lantern asked, his ring construct still active. Just let him wander around. Superman's expression was troubled. Look at his weapons. That armor. This isn't some mindless monster. He's equipped for war, specific war. But against what? The answer came 3 blocks later. The cultists had gathered in an abandoned warehouse, their ritual already underway. Candles formed a pentagram on the concrete floor. Chanting filled the air, the words pulling at the fabric of reality in an attempt to bridge the gap between Earth and Hell. The gateway was small, barely a shimmer, but it was growing. The Slayer walked through the warehouse wall. Concrete and steel parted like tissue paper as the armored figure emerged from a cloud of dust. The cultists froze, their chanting dying in their throats. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the Slayer raised his shotgun. What followed was over in seconds. The cultists died without ceremony, each one eliminated with mechanical precision. But it was the gateway that captured the Justice League's attention. A minor demon, something that would have required Constantine's expertise and hours of preparation to banish, began to materialize through the portal. The Slayer grabbed it by what approximated a throat and pulled the creature fully into reality. Then he tore it apart with his bare hands, the demon's essence scattering like smoke in a hurricane. The gateway collapsed, its connection to the infernal realm severed permanently. The Slayer stood among the carnage, his armor splattered with substances that had no business existing in the physical world. Then he simply turned and walked back toward the hole he'd made in the wall. "Wait," Superman called out, moving to intercept. "We need to talk about what just happened." The Slayer stopped. His helmet turned toward Superman, and for a moment the Man of Steel felt the weight of something ancient and implacable settle on him. Not hostility, not even acknowledgement. Just the simple fact of existence, like staring into the heart of a neutron star. Then the Slayer's hand moved to his belt and produced a device covered in demonic iconography. He held it up for Superman to see, then pointed at the destroyed gateway. The message was clear even without words. Demons. He hunted demons. He's not here for us. Wonder Woman realized, her voice carrying a mix of awe and unease. He's not interested in humanity at all. We're simply not his concern. Batman had already begun analyzing the cultists' remains through his cowl's sensors. These weren't killed in rage or passion. Every strike was calculated for maximum efficiency. He's not a warrior. He's an exterminator, and we just witnessed him doing his job. The Slayer pocketed the device and resumed walking, his sensors already tracking the next concentration of demonic activity. Gotham. The city was riddled with dark magic accumulated over decades of occult activity. There would be more to kill there. "Do we follow him?" Flash asked. Superman's jaw tightened. "Yes, but we observe, not engage. If he's truly only targeting demonic threats, then The words seemed to pain him. "He's helping, in his own way." "Helping by massacring cultists," Green Lantern protested. "They were summoning demons," Batman stated flatly. "In most jurisdictions, that's grounds for extreme intervention. He simply moved faster than our legal system could process the threat." The League followed at a distance as the Slayer moved through Metropolis, then across the river toward Gotham's darker streets. Twice more he located and eliminated demon-worshipping cells that the Justice League hadn't even known existed. Each time his efficiency was absolute. Each time he killed only those directly involved with the inferno, leaving innocent bystanders completely untouched. In the Watchtower, Martian Manhunter observed through the League's body cameras, his telepathic senses straining to touch the armored figure's mind. What he found made him recoil. "There is nothing there," he reported to the assembled heroes monitoring the situation. "No thoughts, no emotions, no consciousness as we understand it. Just purpose. Endless, burning, absolute purpose." "What kind of purpose?" Aquaman asked. John's mental voice carried something approaching fear. "The kind that has been burning for so long that it has consumed everything else." He does not hate demons. Hatred implies emotion. He simply erases them the way fire consumes oxygen. It is his nature, his entire being. In Gotham, the Slayer reached the ruins of an old church where darker rituals had left permanent scars on reality. Cultists and minor demons alike fell before him in a matter of minutes. When the last one expired, he stood in the center of the desecrated sanctuary, his sensors sweeping for additional threats. Batman emerged from the shadows, his cape merging with the darkness. "I need to know if you're going to become a problem for this city." The Slayer turned his head toward Batman. The detective held his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to retreat. The two regarded each other in silence, warrior to warrior, hunter to hunter. Then the Slayer simply walked past him and out into the night. "Sir!" Robin's voice crackled in Batman's ear. "Should I pursue?" "No," Batman said quietly, watching the armored figure disappear into Gotham's labyrinth. He's not our enemy. He's something worse. He's a solution to a problem we didn't know how to solve, and we have no control over how thoroughly he solves it. The Slayer continued his hunt through the night, following traces of demonic corruption that led deeper into Earth's mystical underbelly. Behind him, the Justice League maintained their vigil, uncertain whether they were witnessing salvation or damnation. In the shadows between worlds, darker things began to take notice. The consequences manifested at midnight across every time zone simultaneously. In the Silver City, the angelic host gathered in emergency conclave for the first time since the war in heaven. Zariel stood before the assembled seraphim, his wings dim with confusion. The cosmic balance they had maintained for eons had simply ceased to function. Hell, the necessary counterweight to heaven's light, no longer existed as a destination for damned souls. "They have nowhere to go," he reported, his voice strained. "The condemned, the irredeemable, those who chose darkness. Without hell to receive them, they're caught in limbo. The cycle is broken." The presence remained silent, as it always did. But its absence of guidance spoke volumes. On Earth, the specter materialized in the remains of what had been Trigon's throne room. Now nothing more than a void in dimensional space. The spirit of vengeance, tasked with administering divine punishment since the beginning of mortal sin, found himself facing an impossible dilemma. His power, his very purpose, relied on hell as the ultimate destination for the wicked. "Where do I send them now?" he whispered to the emptiness. No answer came. In the House of Mystery, Constantine's emergency gathering had grown to include every major mystical player, still functional. Zatanna, Deadman, Swamp Thing, Detective Chimp, and a dozen others crowded into the main hall, all reporting the same catastrophic reality. "It's not just hell proper," Constantine explained, lighting his fifth cigarette in as many minutes. "It's the entire demonic ecosystem. The triumvirate's gone. Neron, Belial, Satanus, all the bloody lords and ladies wiped out. Every demon packed on record null and void. Every soul bargain canceled. Every curse powered by infernal energy inert." "That sounds like good news," Deadman offered weakly. "It's a disaster," Zatanna countered. 50% of protective magic relies on binding demons or threatening them with worse demons. Without that framework, we've lost half our defensive capabilities. Cities like Gotham, New Orleans, Las Vegas, they're all built on foundations of contained demonic energy. If those containments fail, they are failing. Swamp Thing's voice rumbled through the Green's connection. "I can feel it. The barriers between worlds are thin, where hell used to press against reality. Something else is coming through those gaps now." Constantine's expression darkened. "The dark multiverse. Those bastards have been waiting for an opportunity like this for ages. Hell was a filter keeping the worst nightmares from bubbling up. Now that filter's gone and the basement door's wide open. As if summoned by his words, the first breach opened in Crime Alley. It was not a portal or a gateway, but a wound, reality peeling back to reveal something underneath that should never have been visible. From that wound poured creatures that defied classification. Demons twisted by dark multiverse logic, beings that were simultaneously alive and dead, matter and antimatter. They spilled into Gotham like cancer cells metastasizing. Batman responded within minutes, but his standard tactics proved useless. These entities didn't follow rules, didn't operate according to any physics he could predict or exploit. One of them phased through a building, leaving the structure aged 100 years in seconds. Another consumed shadows and grew larger, with each one absorbed. "All units fall back." Batman ordered, his mind racing through increasingly desperate contingencies. "We need the League. We need..." The Slayer walked around the corner and opened fire. The effect was immediate and devastating. The dark multiverse demons creatures born from nightmare logic and twisted reality encountered something they had never faced before. Something that refused to acknowledge their impossible nature. The Slayer's weapons didn't care that they should phase through matter or exist in superposition. The shells hit the plasma burned, and the demons died. Because to the Slayer, they were all just demons. And demons died when he killed them. Reality's protests were irrelevant. "He's killing them," Robin reported from his vantage point, his voice carrying disbelief. "The things we couldn't even touch, he's just killing them." Batman watched as the Slayer methodically cleared Crime Alley. His movements unchanged from when he'd hunted cultists. Efficient, mechanical, absolute. When the last dark multiverse horror expired, the Slayer's helmet turned sensors already tracking the next breach. There were dozens more opening across the planet. In the Watchtower, Cyborg coordinated global response as breach after breach manifested. Tokyo, Mumbai, São Paulo. Every major city with a history of demonic activity suddenly found itself flooded with entities from the dark multiverse creatures that had been waiting eons for Hell's bulwark to fail. "We can't fight them all," Hawkgirl reported from Chicago, her mace passing through a phantom that laughed as it tore apart a city block. "They're not following any rules we understand. One entity is engaging them successfully," Martian Manhunter observed, tracking the Slayer's progress across the planetary grid. "He has eliminated 17 breaches in the past hour." Superman's frown deepened. "He's cleaning up a mess he partially created. If he hadn't destroyed Hell, Trigon would still be preparing his next invasion," Wonder Woman countered. "We cannot blame him for consequences he likely does not comprehend. He is a weapon, not a strategist." Flash vibrated with nervous energy. "So what do we do? Just let him keep going. Hope he kills everything before the dark multiverse completely overruns us." The question hung in the air unanswered. In Metropolis, the largest breach yet tore open above the Daily Planet building. From it emerged something that made even the Slayer pause momentarily. A construct of pure dark multiverse energy, vaguely humanoid, but constantly shifting, wearing the faces of 1,000 defeated heroes as a mockery of identity. It was, in essence, the concept of heroic failure given physical form. The entity spoke with voices layered upon voices. "You are the anomaly, the one who broke the cycle. We have been waiting so long for this gift." The Slayer loaded a shell into the super shotgun. "You cannot destroy us. We are the inevitable darkness. We are what comes when hope dies. We are." Both barrels discharged simultaneously. The entity staggered its stolen faces, flickering with surprise. The Slayer walked forward through the smoke and fired again. And again. Each blast tore chunks from the creature's metaphysical structure, refusing to accept its claims of invulnerability. The dark multiverse entity tried to phase, to shift into a state where damage was meaningless. The Slayer simply grabbed it and held it in place while he reloaded. This is not possible, then, the entity managed. "You are merely mortal, merely." The Slayer drew the crucible and drove it through the creature's core. The entity's scream echoed across 11 dimensions as the blade's energy unraveled its existence. Unlike previous victims, this one took longer to die, its dark multiverse nature giving it resilience that even Hell's demons lacked. But resilience was not immunity. The crucible's energy spread like a virus through the creature's form, severing every connection, collapsing every quantum state it existed in. When it finally expired, the breach above Metropolis sealed itself as though reality was grateful to close the wound. The Justice League assembled around the Slayer, maintaining a respectful distance. Superman stepped forward, his cape settling around him. "You're going after all of them, aren't you?" It wasn't really a question. Every demon, every dark multiverse horror. You're going to hunt them until none remain. The Slayer's only response was to turn and begin walking toward the next breach, his sensors already locked on the coordinates. Batman's voice came through the team's comms, quiet but certain. He's going into the dark multiverse itself. That's where they're coming from, so that's where he'll go. He won't stop until he's eliminated the source. The dark multiverse is infinite, Wonder Woman protested. Even if he could survive there, he cannot kill infinity. He doesn't know that, Batman replied. Or more accurately, he doesn't care. He'll try anyway. And God help whatever's down there when he arrives. The Slayer reached a nexus point where 3 breaches intersected, creating a stable pathway into the dark multiverse proper. Without hesitation, he stepped through. Behind him, reality shuddered with relief as his presence departed. The Justice League stood in silence, watching the portal pulse with dark energy. We should follow him, Flash suggested. Back him up. No, Superman said firmly. That's his war, not ours. Our job is to protect Earth while he's gone. To clean up the breaches he can't reach immediately. To make sure that when he returns, if he returns, there's still a world worth saving. In the depths of the dark multiverse, the Slayer descended through layers of twisted reality. Around him, malformed Batmen and corrupted Justice League screamed in the darkness. Nightmares given form prowled between dead universes. And deeper still, Barbatos stirred in his lair of shadows and broken dreams. The dragon god of the dark multiverse had consumed realities for eons uncounted. He had devoured hope and feasted on despair. His very existence was antithetical to life itself. The Slayer's sensors detected the massive demonic energy signature and immediately classified it as a target. Barbatos felt the presence enter his domain, this tiny spark of determined violence in his infinite darkness. The dragon god laughed a sound that destroyed lesser universes and prepared to consume this latest offering. He would soon discover that some prey fought back. The war had found its final battlefield. The dark multiverse burned. For 3 days and nights, the fabric of that twisted realm convulsed with violence that registered on instruments across every dimension. The Batman Who Laughs. Architect of a dozen apocalypses encountered the Slayer in the ruins of a dead Gotham and lasted 7 minutes before his corrupted form was torn apart so thoroughly that even his dark multiverse resurrection protocols failed to activate. The infected Supermen, the Nightmare, Wonder Women, the Justice Leagues twisted into mockeries of heroism, all fell before a warrior who refused to differentiate between types of evil. Barbatos himself rose from his throne of collapsed realities, his draconic form spanning miles, his voice capable of unmaking lesser gods. The battle that followed shook the foundations of the dark multiverse, causing tremors that rippled into the regular multiverse and beyond. When it ended, Barbatos lay broken. His essence scattered across dimensions he had once ruled absolutely. The Slayer stood in the center of the dragon god's lair. His armor scored and dented, but his purpose undiminished. His sensors swept the surrounding darkness, searching for additional threats. Nothing remained. Every corrupted entity, every nightmare given form, every twisted demon that had spawned in the dark multiverse's infinite depths had been eliminated or driven so deep into hiding that they no longer registered as threats. The Slayer's mission parameters were clear. No demons remained in accessible range. The hunt was complete. He turned and began the long walk back toward the dimensional barrier between the dark multiverse and Earth Zero, leaving behind a realm that would take eons to recover from his presence. When he emerged from the breach 4 days after his departure, the Justice League was waiting. They had prepared for this moment, uncertain whether he would return as savior or conqueror. Batman had 17 contingency plans. Superman had positioned himself to intercept any hostile action. Wonder Woman's hand rested on her sword. The Slayer ignored them all. His sensors detected no demonic activity within range. Earth Zero registered as clean, or as clean as any world could be, after the complete eradication of its infernal ecosystem. He had done what he came to do. "Wait," Superman called out, his voice carrying both authority and a strange note of respect. "We need to understand what just happened. What you did. The consequences of..." The Slayer's helmet turned toward him, and Superman fell silent. Not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that communication was pointless. This being did not negotiate or explain. It simply acted according to a purpose so singular, the dialogue was irrelevant. Batman stepped forward, his analytical mind still trying to piece together the full scope of what had transpired. "You've eliminated Hell, destroyed the dark multiverse's upper layers, killed entities that were supposed to be unkillable. The cosmic balance of this entire reality has shifted because of you." The Slayer remained motionless, his posture suggesting neither pride nor regret, just existence, just completion of task. "Do you even understand what you've done?" Wonder Woman asked her warrior's instinct, recognizing something in the armored figure that transcended simple violence. "You've changed the fundamental nature of our universe. Souls have nowhere to be judged now. The cycle of damnation and redemption is broken." If the Slayer comprehended her words, he gave no indication. His sensors had detected something else now. The faint residual signature of Argent energy, distant and growing weaker, leading back toward the original breach point in the bleed. The energy that had drawn him here was dissipating the connection between dimensions, healing itself. It was time to leave. The Slayer began walking toward the nearest high point, his trajectory calculated for optimal dimensional breach access. The Justice League followed, uncertain whether to stop him or simply bear witness to his departure. "Should we try to contain him?" Flash asked over the secure channel. "I mean, he's basically a walking apocalypse. What if he comes back?" "He won't," Batman said with absolute certainty. "He came here following demonic energy. There's none left to follow. We're no longer relevant to whatever drives him." On the rooftop of LexCorp Tower, the Slayer stopped and turned to face the city one final time. Metropolis stretched below him, millions of lives continuing their daily existence, unaware of how close they had come to annihilation. Unaware that their hell had been scoured clean, that demons would never again trouble their world in the numbers they once had. The Slayer raised one hand and activated a device built into his armor's gauntlet. The air before him shimmered reality, peeling back to reveal the space between dimensions. The bleed opened like a wound, showing glimpses of other realities, other worlds, other wars still being fought in the endless campaign against darkness. "Wait!" Constantine's voice crackled through a hastily assembled mystical projection. The Warlock appeared as a translucent image beside the Justice League, his face haggard from days of magical emergency response. "I need to know. What the bloody hell are you? Where did you come from?" "Why..." The Slayer stepped through the breach without answering. The portal collapsed behind him with a sound like a thunderclap, and he was gone. The Justice League stood in silence on the rooftop, the weight of the past days settling over them like a shroud. Superman's enhanced hearing tracked the complete absence of demonic activity across the planet. Wonder Woman's divine senses felt the strange emptiness where Hell's presence had been a constant for millennia. Batman's mind raced through the implications that would occupy him for years to come. "What do we tell people?" Flash asked quietly. "How do we explain what happened?" "We don't," Batman replied. "We document it. We study it. We prepare for the consequences, but we don't broadcast that an unknown entity just fundamentally altered the metaphysical structure of our reality. The mystical community is in chaos." Constantine's projection added, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Half our spells don't work anymore. The other half work too well without Hell's interference. It'll take decades to recalibrate our entire magical framework. But the demons are gone," Zatanna said, appearing beside Constantine. "The major infernal threats that have plagued humanity since the beginning, gone. Is that not worth the price?" "We'll find out," Superman said grimly. In the days and years to come, we'll discover whether a world without hell is better or worse than what we had before. In the Watchtower monitoring stations registered the complete absence of demonic activity for the first time in recorded history. In the Silver City, the angelic host began the long process of restructuring cosmic law without hell as a counterbalance. In hidden monasteries and secret temples across Earth, mystics felt the fundamental change and wondered what it meant for humanity's eternal soul. And in the space between dimensions, the Doomslayer walked through the bleed, following the fading traces of Argent energy back toward his own reality. Behind him, Earth Zero began the process of adapting to a new cosmic order, one without the certainty of damnation, without the threat of infernal invasion. Hell was dead. The demons were gone. The dark multiverse had been culled to the point of dormancy. For Earth Zero, it was the end of one age and the beginning of another. For the Justice League, it was a mystery that would haunt them forever. They had witnessed something that should not exist, had stood before a force that operated outside every law they understood. And they had survived, only because they were not demons. The Slayer disappeared into the vast infinity of the multiverse, and reality sealed the wound behind him. In the archives of the Justice League, in the secret files accessible only to the highest levels of clearance, a new entry appeared. Designation: the Hellwalker, the Unchained, the Silent Crusader. Threat level: unmeasurable. Current status: departed. Likelihood of return: unknown. Recommended action: pray he never has reason to come back. In the ruins of what had been hell where Trigon's throne once stood, where the Pit Lords had ruled and the infernal legions had marched. There was only silence now. Only darkness. Only the absence of something that had existed since the dawn of mortal sin. And in that silence, that absence, that void, where damnation used to dwell, a new truth settled into the cosmic framework of Earth Zero. Some forces could not be reasoned with, could not be bargained with, could not be stopped. They could only be survived, and only if you were not standing in their way when they passed through. The Doomslayer had come to Earth Zero not as conqueror or savior, but as natural law. As inevitable as entropy, as absolute as death. He had come, he had killed, he had left, and the universe would never be the same.